So, hello, and thank you very much indeed for coming along in person to listen to me today, and those of you who are joining in online. So, hello and welcome to our talk, Edinburgh from Above. This oblique aerial image taken near Holyrood Park, facing west, was taken on the 20th of November 1949. And it is an image which features in Above Scotland Cities book, which is available over there for you to have a little closer look at afterwards if you so desire. But it is a fantastic and evocative image of our city. Excuse me, I'm having a small technical issue. Of course, this was all fine a moment ago. Okay. So thanks again for inviting me along, my colleagues in John Sinclair House. And as Neil just said, I am part of the Learning and Inclusion team, and I work mainly with online digital archives, which includes Scran, that you see me standing in front of here, as well as the others, which we will touch upon as we go. Now, this example, an oblique aerial photograph of Edinburgh, shows Waverley Station, St Andrew's Square and Queen Street Gardens, and it was taken in 1929. This particular image comes from the Aero Films collection, and it can be enjoyed on the Britain from Above website. Britain from Above includes 1.26 million negatives and more than 2,000 photograph albums, dating from 1919 to 2006. And the total collection represents an unparalleled picture of the changing face of Britain and throughout the 20th century. It includes the largest and most significant number of air photographs of Britain taken before 1939. It includes urban, suburban, rural, coastal and industrial scenes. And we'll get a little flavour of some of that today. Now, this image can be found on Scran. So alongside NCAP, the National Collection of Aerial Photography, Britain from Above, and of course, Canmore, it provides some explanation as to where I have researched and sourced the content for today's talk. And since we'll mostly be airborne for the next 50 minutes or so, we've flown in these chaps to help us navigate, keep us safe, as well as making sure you're comfortable during today's flight over the city and surrounding airspace. As you'll appreciate, we cannot have aerial imagery without aviation. Their development goes hand in hand. And now these chaps have been essential in gathering aerial imagery. They are the pilots in the RAF squadron, including American, Canadian, New Zealander, an Englishman and a South African. And they're probably posed for this photograph as a propaganda image during World War I, when the art of aerial photography was in its infancy. Here again, we can see Edinburgh city centre on furl below us, as it was seen during World War II. But how did we get here? To fully appreciate Edinburgh from above, we should really start at the beginning by returning to the story of James Tytler, a local aviation entrepreneur. This engraved print illustrates the meeting of balloonist James Tytler and Vincent Lunardi. Ballooning grew up in France in 1783, when both hot air balloon and hydrogen-filled methods were attempted with varying degrees of success. The ensuing publicity triggered a craze which manifested itself in Italy and Britain very soon after. Tytler had been largely unsuccessful in his ballooning ventures here in Scotland due to bad weather and given in the wake of our recent storm, not surprising. When he met Vincent Lunardi here in Edinburgh, as illustrated, Lunardi commiserated with him about the weather challenges. And the print shows the meeting and the drawings of their respective balloon designs behind them. To the left, you can see Tytler's, and to the right, Lunardi. Born on the 17th of December, 1745 in Forfar, James Tytler, amongst other things, was the editor of the Encyclopaedia Britannica. In June 1784, he exhibited his balloon inside the incomplete dome of Register House, now the home of National Records of Scotland. Tytler's barrel-shaped balloon was about 40 feet high and 30 feet in diameter. It was made of cloth and strapped with cables from which the basket was suspended. Four rods were thought to support with an iron brazier needed to keep the balloon aloft. In August of 1784, tickets were sold at 3 shillings each to witness his third attempt to launch the balloon. This was the first one to be a success. So 241 years ago, he ascended in his grand Edinburgh fire balloon and flew approximately 3,000 feet from Cumley Gardens near Holyrood Park to Wrestlerig on the outskirts of the city. He rose to a height of 105 meters, dizzying, and landed safely, making the first manned aerial flight in the British Isles, immortalizing himself in the process as Balloon Tytler. However, Tytler had been largely unsuccessful in his ballooning ventures, and his last flight took place on the 26th of July, 1785. The flamboyant Italian Vincent Lunardi came to Britain in September 1784, first demonstrating his hydrogen-filled balloon in London, and after demonstrations in Liverpool, he arrived in Edinburgh in 1785. Here we see him depicted by the Edinburgh caricaturist John Kay in his balloon basket, ready to ascend on his first Scottish flight from Heriot Hospital grounds, that's George Heriot School as we know it today on Lauriston Place, on the 5th of October, 1785. Lunardi conducted 5 aerial voyages in Scotland, including his flight across the Firth of Forth to Fife, covering 24 miles and rising 1,100 feet. Such adventures in ballooning were so fashionable, they were captured in clay and glaze on a ceramic plate. Quite a souvenir. And here we see the balloon ascent of Vincent or Vincenzo Lunardi around 1785. Scott's Tytler was overshadowed by the Italian Lunardi, who even inspired fashions in skirts and hats. In fact, the Lunardi bonnet is mentioned in the contemporary poem by Robert Burns of 1786. Burns was not immune to popular culture and made reference to the bonnet by admonishing the eponymous parasite to a louse. In the poem, he mocks the bonnet wearer for looking ridiculous. As you can see from the cartoon, Lunardi bonnets were certainly not sensible headwear. And despite the silliness of balloonomania, Burns understood the romance of being able to fly. And I should point out and say thanks to the Burns Museum for allowing me to include this in my talk. Aviation was soon adopted and exploited by the military. This humorous caricature shows Highland regiments using their skirts as parachutes, dropping from hot air balloons in a new method of warfare around 1800. During the 19th century, photography was pioneered by people such as Edinburgh's very own duo, Hill and Adamson, but that is a whole other story. The next major leap in aerial innovation was accelerated by war. And during World War I, the practice of observation from the air, or aerial reconnaissance, developed rapidly. In 1914, aerial photography used conventional cameras and techniques. But by the end of the Great War, such photography had developed, and the strategic weapon of photo reconnaissance had become established practice. Aerial photographs proved invaluable in strategic planning. Which leads us to look at this early aerial photograph of Edinburgh's aerodrome taken around 1919. Turn House was opened in May 1916 to support 26 reserve squadrons of the Royal Flying Corps to train pilots using Farman biplanes. It also housed other squadrons, including the 77 Home Defence Squadron. In 1917, in addition to the Royal Flying Corps squadrons, the Naval Air Service aircraft repair depot and fleet practice station was established here too. At the time, a railway line, those of you at the very front might be able to make it out, ran immediately behind the Air Force terminal with a local passenger halt. At the time of the photo here, it was a simple grass strip. Hard runways were not laid down until 1940, when the famous A pattern was laid out and adopted. In the same year that Turnhouse opened, we see an exploded German bomb in the grounds of Edinburgh Royal Infirmary. A German Zeppelin raid on the night of the 2nd and 3rd of April 1916 saw bombs being dropped all over the city. The bombs killed 8 people, including 3 children. This incendiary bomb was dropped in the grounds of the hospital, and Mr. Martin, who was a radiographer, took the photograph before it was removed. In fact, he had dozens of copies printed and sold them on behalf of infirmary fundraising. On a copy of this postcard, Kay Angus, a telephone operator at the Royal Infirmary, records that the air raid started at 11:55 p.m. and that this bomb dropped at 12:05 a.m. As the intensity of war and such events were increasing, the Grand Fleet assembled over the Firth of Forth, or in the Firth of Forth, rather. Aerial reconnaissance was developing all at this time too. And here we have an aerial panoramic view from 1918, and it really is quite spectacular. It gives the example of the range which could be achieved even then by an oblique camera mounted on an airplane or even an airship, and the extent of the detail in spite of the engine vibration and the moving platform conditions. It's worth pointing out what's particularly fascinating in this image is that the warships at this point in time, many of them still have masts like tall ships. Something not to be seen in the skies in the 21st century, an NS-3 airship in its new wheelwright configuration, pictured in flight at East Fortune over East Lothian in 1918. This staggering image, again taken over the Forth, was taken in an NS-3 airship, and seen in the foreground in May 1918 are the ships of the Grand Fleet below. It was used on patrols. However, near the Isle of May in the Firth of Forth, the airship lost in a storm on the 22nd of June 1918. This is the nearby naval base at Port Edgar, as seen from above in 1918, in May. At the bottom centre of this photograph, the following is written: Port Edgar, TB Destroyer Base, Firth of Forth, 1916. The date 1916, however, is wrong, since the V and the W class destroyers, which there are a few in the photo, were not introduced into the fleet until 1970. So quite often you get little anomalies when you're looking through the archives where things don't quite add up. Putting World War I behind us and moving inland to view the extensive Royal Infirmary of Edinburgh around 1920. By 1910, the new buildings of the Eye and Ear Pavilion and the laundry made up the boundary of the hospital to the west at Lauriston Lane, and beyond it in the southwest corner the land lay occupied by George Watson's College. The hospital purchased this in the mid-1920s in order to create better maternity services and nursing accommodation. The Simpson Memorial Maternity Pavilion and Florence Nightingale Nurses' Home eventually opened in 1939, funded by the hospital's bicentenary appeal. It's quite something to see. In 1927, this was taken near Holyrood, facing northwest, and we can see Holyrood House built onto the 12th century abbey just outside the city walls at the foot of the Canongate. This was pictured by Aero Films, who were one of the earliest commercial aerial photography companies in the world. Interesting to see the site of the now Scottish Parliament as it once looked when breweries were big business in the vicinity. You can just make out the brewery buildings. Returning to Turnhouse. Here are the hangars as viewed from the air in around 1931. Turnhouse Airfield, as you know, dates back to 1916. It was reoccupied in 1925 by the RAF, that is the 603 City of Edinburgh Auxiliary Squadron, to be precise. They flew Avro 504s and DH-9A biplanes, replaced later with Westland Wapiti biplanes. And if you look really closely, one of the Westland Wapiti biplanes can be seen down in the left of the image. I'm hoping everyone can hear me okay at the back. Everyone? Okay. Now here we can see 9 of those Westland Wapiti, I hope I'm saying that correctly, aircraft, and they're parked outside in 1931. Later, in 1934, the squadron received Hawker Hart fighter bombers. Although strictly speaking, this is not an aerial image, I felt it was worth sharing. Looming over an interwar Musselburgh is the German airship Graf Zeppelin. It was seen on the 3rd of July, 1932, on one of its 3 visits to Britain between 1930 and 1932. In fact, it was recorded as being over Birmingham on the very same day it was recorded in Musselburgh. The Graf Zeppelin was launched in 1928, and its first commercial flight was across the Atlantic to Lakenhurst, New Jersey, 1929. It remained in service until 1937. And here we have 3 of those Hawker Harts of the 603 Squadron in formation over the Forth in 1934. The Hawker Hart was a 2-seater day bomber, which consisted of a fabric-covered metal frame. It had a top speed of 184 miles an hour, which sounds utterly terrifying, and a ceiling height of around 21,000 feet. In my opinion, the pilots must have been fearless. And here is another in-flight photo of the 603 Squadron flying over the Berwick coastline close to the Bass Rock, near North Berwick, during a cross-country exercise. These Hawker Hart planes carried a 500-pound bomb and had a fixed forward-firing Vickers machine gun and a ring-mounted Lewis gun at the back. You can see the tail end gunner in this image, in fact. This time, the 603 Squadron are over Fidra Island in 1936, in advance of World War II. In 1938, the squadron became a fighter unit. World War II began on the 1st of September 1939, and this was taken sometime before the 2nd of October 1939. It is a Luftwaffe aerial photograph of Turnhouse Airfield. The German Luftwaffe took aerial photographs of parts of Scotland throughout the war. The photographs were used for intelligence work, such as selecting targets, assessing bomb accuracy, and finding equipment and defensive positions. As established, this location was home to the 603 Squadron, who are jointly credited destroying the first enemy aircraft over Britain in World War II. Edinburgh Airport today lies to the west. Again, we return to the Forth and the Forth Bridge in 1939. The first German air raid into Scottish skies took place on the 16th of October 1939 and was planned with the help of extensive Luftwaffe aerial intelligence. The annotations on this reconnaissance image of the Forth Railway Bridge identify anti-aircraft and coastal batteries. Of course, both sides were watching each other from the skies. This is a vertical aerial photograph of Turnhouse Airfield, also taken during World War II. However, this example was taken over 80 years ago by the Royal Air Force on the 9th of September 1943. Such vertical photographs were taken by the RAF during photographic reconnaissance training and used to ascertain the accuracy of the pilot in photographing a target and to aid the skills of the photographic interpretation teams. Again, over the Forth, looking north, taken by the RAF on the 20th of October 1941. Two elements of the bridge defences can be seen: an anti-aircraft gun battery to the west of Dalmeny Station and 4 barrage balloons sighted around the bridge to deter enemy bombers. The Forth Bridge arrows out over the estuary to meet North Queen's Ferry, sitting like a small island at the top of the photograph. This unusual perspective and view shows the bridge as a thin, dynamic line, but the intricate framework of its double cantilevers are casting very long and distinct shadows over the water. Still at war, we are now looking down at Gorgie in 1941, and we can see a packed mixture of housing, factories and parks spreading out from 19th century Edinburgh. And in the centre to the left of the photograph, we can see Tyne Castle and Murrayfield stadiums. This was taken again by the RAF camouflage unit on the 22nd of October. This is in fact a Polish squadron plane at Donino Airfield near St Andrews, and I've included this because this squadron was used for spotting and reconnaissance duties and anti-invasion patrols. Seen here after the patrol, it is having its camera unloaded by the ground crew as the pilot is climbing down out of the cockpit around 1942, and the contents of the camera that is being unloaded contains crucial visual information. War is over, but we cannot ignore its contribution to the development of aerial photography, nor its contribution to aerial recording. This is Edinburgh City Centre, taken by the RAF in 1947. It must have been a nice clear day on the 15th of August, because this is a view above the 18th century town planning as laid out by the 1766 architect James Craig. And we can see the design of Edinburgh's new town very clearly. When examining this online yourself, perhaps if you return to some of this later, you can zoom in and get incredible detail from these images. You can see the simple grid layout of the primary and secondary streets with civic squares at each end that are still stand out in the picture. The two grand streets of Princes Street and Queen Street, the great bulk of Edinburgh Castle, the grass market, and the meadows towards the bottom, which of course we're not too far from today. On the same day, we have another vertical image of Holyrood Park and the buildings of Southside bending against the arc of Salisbury Crags. As an aside, did you know in 1949 that the Abercrombie plan proposed an inner ring road for Edinburgh encircling the old town and blasting through the south side? The idea of the ring road was perpetuated again by something called the Buchanan Plan of 1972. It was an idea that was floating around for decades, but ultimately was never implemented. Also for the eagle-eyed, I'm looking at you in the front row, John Sinclair House is actually in this image where we are sitting today. At this time, of course, it would have been Brown's Furniture Store's warehouse, which was on the corner of Bernard Terrace, just at the end of the street. So we are in this image. This is the image which I used as my opening shot. It is the aerial oblique picture of Holyrood Park, and it presents a different perspective on the city in 1949, facing west with the castle emerging from the Har and mist and city smoke. Below the imposing fortress of the castle, you can see some church steeples which are studding the skyline, while in the lee of Calton Hill, you can see Thomas Tate's brand new St Andrew's House, which had just been completed, and all that lovely Art Deco architecture. And if you've managed to pinpoint where St Andrew's House is, there's a strange line, and that is actually the vapor trail leading right up to the aeroplane that has taken this photograph. It's like a little trail of breadcrumbs. And if you haven't recognized this yet in the wintry darkness, this is the west end of the city centre, with Lothian Road taken facing south in December 1951. The now demolished Caledonian Station, or once called Princes Street Station, curves outwards from the Baroque facade of the attached hotel, and today it is the Waldorf Astoria, or I still think of it as the Caledonian. But it really is rather murky at this point. Meanwhile, things are looking a little brighter in the south side of the city, and this was taken over Newington, facing northwest in December 51. Edinburgh's villa estates stretch far as the eye can see, and their bulky facades multiplying out across both sides of the wide artery of Craigmillar Park. At the very top, I can just make out Longmore House, the other Historic Environment Scotland HQ building. But of course, at that time, when it was taken in 1951, it would have been Longmore Hospital, not Longmore House. It's the chaps from the 603 Squadron again. They're on parade at Turnhouse in 1954, and it looks like they've got some nice new airplanes. These are Vampire fighters, all lined up outside the hangars. Also in that lineup is something called a Meteor TMK7, if I've got any plane buffs in the audience. And they were used for jet conversion training. So they've taken the new Vampire fighters on a fly past the Forth Bridge for a photograph in 1954. The ferry from North to South Queen's Ferry and vice versa can be seen on the crossing here too, to the top. Returning to base and coming into land in 1955. Back on terra firma, we can see, here we have the much loved institution of the floral clock in 1957. And the display that year shows the 603 Squadron's motto, Gin Dar, which loosely translates, come on, I dare you, or if you dare, in the Doric. Either way, typifying their fighting spirit, and it just goes to show how highly they were held in regard by the city of Edinburgh to feature on the floral clock. Without Turnhouse Airport, we'd be lacking in local aerial images. So here I would like to acknowledge the part played by these people too, the air traffic controllers, including a Mr. George Sells and Mr. Andrew Scott, who are pictured in their state-of-the-art brand new air traffic control room in January 1958. And here it is, the exterior of the tower in the same year. The design very much looks of the 1950s. We have now landed in the 1960s. And from here, we will proceed chronologically into the 21st century, which means we'll be darting all over the city and returning to certain landmarks. We can learn a lot from archive aerial photographs, and we hope to learn a little more at the University of Edinburgh. This is the King's Buildings under some development in the 1960s, wedged between Mayfield Road on the east, West Main Roads on the north, and Craigmillar Golf Course to the west and south. The buildings on the site include the Daniel Rutherford and Darwin buildings, the 1930s Sanderson's building, and Ashworth Laboratories for zoology, and in the northwest corner, the Grant Institute, and so on, and also the James Clerk Maxwell building. Within the site, some construction work is also being carried out, most noticeably the King's Buildings in the centre. Not yet constructed is Murchison House, where the British Geological Survey would come to occupy. And right at the very top of the image, just slightly cropped, hopefully you can still see it. It's occluded by that header, but the observatory is just under that. Again, very fresh looking buildings photographed in the same site in 1960. These come from the Scotsman newspaper archives as opposed to some of the other material we've been looking at. Now, this stunning photograph is, of course, Waverley Station, and it dates from 1961. At the top, you can see Edinburgh Castle and Castle Rock, and there's quite a stark contrast between the higgledy-piggledy old town dwellings and buildings that are much more organic as they come down into the Norloch Valley. And then on the other side, there is the order of the new town. So quite gives you a very stark contrast. This time we can see St. Mary's Cathedral in the distance, and the West End again with Caledonian Station, the Usher Hall roof, Castle Terrace, and car park. Cars are parked on the esplanade of Edinburgh Castle. Not something that we can do today. This was taken on the 9th of January, 1963. So that's what, 62 years ago. It's funny when you look at these because everything looks so familiar. Not a huge amount has changed yet. There's lots of differences. Plenty of change was afoot with the construction of the Forth Road Bridge, the second crossing over the Forth, here in progress in 1963. You can see an isolated segment of the Forth Road Bridge reaching across to the supporting towers on the shore. Officially opened by Queen Elizabeth II on the 4th September 1964. At the time, it was the largest suspension bridge in Europe and the 4th largest in the world, with the main span of 1.05 kilometres and an overall length of 2.5 kilometres. The construction of the bridge brought to an end the 800-year history of the ferry that we saw in the previous photograph between North and South Queensferry. This is another example of an Aero Films collection image taken in April '63. Returning to our studies at the David Hume Tower building at the University of Edinburgh in 1963. The terraced houses on the east side of George Square were soon to be demolished to make way for the William Robertson building, are also shown here, as well as various properties to the north which suffered the same fate. The decision to redevelop George Square for the expanding accommodation needs of the university was contentious, and the original plan was never actually completed. The Georgian terraces to the west side were retained and was part of the terrace, so was part of the terrace to the east. I believe we can also see George Square at the top left and the David Hume Tower lit up to the left in this low winter sun in this image of South Side taken on the 9th of January '63. The Pleasance and St Leonard's Street run from the top to the bottom, with St Leonard's Coal Yards in the right at the foreground. Queen's Park, or Holyrood Park, lies to the right. Not a perspective so many of us get to experience in real life, a view from the cockpit of an aircraft about to land. And yes, you've guessed it, at Turnhouse in 1966. It looks terrifying to me. In fact, the pilot's knuckles are actually white. By 1967, the construction of the Royal Commonwealth Pool was underway, as seen here on the 4th of December. The Commie Pool was designed by RMJM Architects for the 1970 Commonwealth Games, and of course are just around the corner. The 50-metre long pool was used in the 1986 Games and for the diving competition of the Glasgow Games, also in 2014. Note also the site of the Scottish Widows building by Basil Spence. The site looks a little different now, not a hexagon in sight. Significant progress had been made at the swimming pool within a year, and we can get a better perspective on the University of Edinburgh's gleaming new Pollock halls of residence, and also the foot of Arthur's Seat. And again, you can see John Sinclair just up to the left there. The structure of the Commonwealth Pool building itself received architectural acclaim, including a listing in 1993 as one of the 60 key Scottish monuments of the post-war period, a nomination in 2002 by the Architectural Heritage Society of Scotland for making a significant modern contribution to Scottish heritage, and a listing in 2005 in the Prospect 100 list of best modern buildings. It's topping off time on the Dalkeith Road, showing the Commonwealth Pool with a roof this time. There's also a glimpse of Duddingston Loch beyond, and also Pollock Halls that we saw. Raising the stakes as we enter the dizzying heights of the 1970s, a clear summer's day on June the 1st, 1971 to be exact. So what can you see from above in the northwest of the city? Anything jump out there? Well, Cramond Island perhaps, Cramond Causeway, the golf course, and Lauriston Castle. Also the housing developments, Martello Court on Pennywell Gardens, Muir House, which is still one of the tallest buildings in Edinburgh. At 64 metres, it has 23 floors. Coming back round to the city centre again, this image was taken near Calton Hill, facing southeast on the 23rd of June, 1972. The various walkways and neoclassical structures which decorate the top of Calton Hill, including the Nelson Monument, the National Monument, City Observatory, to name a few. And then you can see beyond, across the valley, filled with housing at the time, railways, industry, what was left of it, of the old town industry, and shadows emphasise the natural monument of Salisbury Crags. Directly below the sheer face of those cliffs is the Holyrood Brewery, now the Scottish Parliament. This is one of the images which features in Above Scotland Cities, one of the publications which Neil referred to earlier, which is over there. Hopping to the western Newtown now, facing east, Arthur's Seat is still obvious, but Calton Hill has all but disappeared from this perspective. The image is centred on the giant spires of St Mary's Cathedral, and the western Newtown was the last phase of Edinburgh's second city to be developed, finally reaching its completion in 1880s. Echoes of James Craig's original block grid continue before the layout opens up into the ellipses of Grosvenor, Lansdowne, Glencairn and Eglinton Crescents. Of course, that's not the only part of Edinburgh which continually shifts and changes. This is, I'm sure you will have spotted, the St James's area taken near Waverley Station in 1972, when this multifunctional megastructure complex, which included the St James's Shopping Centre, was completely new. Also included were the former Scottish office, new St Andrew's House, and the brutalist modernist style at the east end of James Craig's Newtown. Same location with a splash of colour in 1975. The expansion of the complex, which first was completed in 1970, continued in the following decades. In this image, the housing at the top of Leith Walk has been cleared to allow the addition of the John Lewis store, again by Sir Basil Spence. And of course, the John Lewis building was built in 1987 and still remains, whereas a lot of the other buildings at the centre of this image have again changed. We're rapidly running out of time, and this aerial photograph of runners in Holyrood Park, or Holyrood Road, sorry, showing from the front to the right is Murray House at the University of Edinburgh, which was then the PE block. There are also in view the Dummy Dykes flats, Park Ale stores and gasworks. The picture was taken in 1985, in the days before the new Scottish Parliament, Dynamic Earth and the 1990s Scotsman building was created. Near the end of the decade, we now have a vertical anaglyph aerial image facing north. It is a 3D aerial image taken in June 1988. Edinburgh's unique topography, both barrier to growth and source of inspiration for the dramatic Newtown plan, is demonstrated by the relationship between the Old Town spine, Calton Hill, and the deep glacial valley of Princess Street Gardens. Our air traffic controllers are guiding us into the 1990s. The Turnhouse Air Traffic Control Centre doesn't seem to have changed a great deal since we last visited in 1958. However, gauging from this aerial image taken over Edinburgh Airport, the terminal has certainly expanded, much like aviation industry itself, within the growth of commercial and leisure flights. This was taken in 1991 by Aero Films. This shows the extent of the runways nearing the end of the 20th century in 1993. Not too far away, this soon became the 21st century reality. Completed in 2005 at a cost of 335 million, this is the international headquarters of the Royal Bank of Scotland at Gogarburn. It received praise for the building's research establishment, looking at the relationship between human behaviour and built environment, suggesting that the buildings that we use can really impact on our well-being and happiness and make us more efficient. In business, considerable sums of money are spent creating offices that improve productivity, and this is an example of such a movement. I am proud to say that this image was taken by a former colleague of ours in the building who has surprised me by arriving in this talk today, as alluded to by Neil earlier. So this is taken by Robert or Bob Adam from Cessna, which used to be used by the Royal Commission on Royal Commission. My mind's just gone blank. Ancient Historic and Monument Scotland, during an aerial survey flight in March 2006. So thank you for all that hard work. You'll recall this early aerial image of the Royal Infirmary. And this comes from the Lothian Health Services Archive, which is housed in the University of Edinburgh Library. And here we are again over the meadows, but facing the Royal Infirmary. The architect David Bryce reputedly consulted Florence Nightingale on creating the design for the new Royal Infirmary in Edinburgh in 1870. In the baronial style, Bryce devised 4 separate medical pavilions with the intention of maximising the amount of light and air that could enter the wards. So again, the thought of buildings enhancing well-being and being positive places to be isn't such a new concept. With the relocation of the infirmary to a greenfield site on the outskirts of the city in 2002, the old Victorian hospital continues to be redeveloped as Quarter Mile. The urban community of housing, shops, hotels, public spaces that intends to integrate modern architecture into the core of Bryce's original building. Next, sadly, we don't have the funding to go inside the North British Hotel with its famous fast-running clock or the Balmoral as it is today. However, I thought I'd give you this unusual perspective on this much-loved city centre icon beside Waverley Station. From the street, you don't necessarily appreciate that there is a central open courtyard. It is, in fact, hollow. More architectural geometry, only really visible looking down. Royal Circle is beautiful in its symmetry. Completed just over 200 years ago in 1823, it marks the western end of the northern New Town, which runs from Drummond Place in the east along the wide parade of Great King Street. Hard to believe this was taken around 15 years ago. It is New Haven, just along the coast. Flats emerged on reclaimed land from Leith Docks, and housing is just one aspect of the Western Harbour vision for the replacement of the old port, which envisaged creating 9 interconnected waterfront villages on 144 hectares of brownfield site, an area which is actually larger than the Georgian New Town. We've almost gone full circle, and it's time to conclude as we fly over Murray Place in the New Town in 2010. By far the largest circus in Edinburgh, it was built for the Earl of Murray in 1822. And just like my regular commute, I keep returning to Waverley Station. This outlook over George IV Bridge and Lawn Market and the High Street draws together some of the most important buildings, personalities and historical events in the city. So from this photograph, we can see the toll booth, otherwise known as the hub, the toll booth church, and plenty of 17th century tenements rubbing shoulders with the 21st century Hotel Missoni, which I think I saw something the other day that they're going to be taking the scaffolding down. Yes, at last. The 20th century National Library of Scotland, the Signet Library, the High Court Judiciary, the 14th century High Kirk of St. Giles, and every rooftop, street and stone, history and architecture meet in this one photograph. And on that note, the pilots need to return to their duties. And I would like to say thank you very much for listening. Here we have Frank Carson on a British Midland flight in 1983. So thank you very much indeed. I hope you found that interesting.